sinking. मानुषी संवाद में आप सबका स्वागत है। वेलकम टू दिस एडिशन ऑफ मानुषी संवाद। आज हमारे साथ दो मेहमान जुड़ेंगे। सबसे पहले डॉक्टर गौतम सेन, जो आजकल हिंदुस्तान में ही है, तो ही इज बेस्ड इन लंदन, और साथ में आधे घंटे बाद जुड़ेंगे हमारे साथ डॉक्टर अजय श्रृंगू। तो रिजीम चेंज पाकिस्तान में जो हुई है, टीवी पे इस पे काफी बहस चल रही है और अखबारों में भी छुटपुट बातें आ रही हैं, परंतु मुझे लगता है कि इसमें इस रिजीम चेंज में क्या फर्क आएगा, क्या नहीं आएगा, इज इट मोर ऑफ द सेम, बैक टू वर्स, एंड मोस्ट इम्पोर्टेंटली हाउ इज इट गोइंग टू इम्पैक्ट इंडिया? गौतम दा, लेट्स हैव यू give us your assessment.
Ji. I think we need to pause for a moment in order to define the nature of Pakistan, which in reality has rarely been either independent or sovereign in reality, and regime change can only happen to such a country, which is indeed independent. Pakistan was created as a military cantonment by skewering a large chunk of Indian territory in order to serve the geopolitical aims of Britain and the Western Alliance. And one dimension was, of course, the old bogey of the threat of the Soviets coming south, and the other very important dimension, which was described by the late historian Iqbal Singh as the Second Cold War, which was launched against India. The first one, of course, being the Cold War against Soviet Union and communism. And Iqbal Singh thought the Second Cold War, which was not really fully understood, was aimed at India. Now, Pakistan, which actually is not really Pakistan, to be precise, it is West Punjab. West Punjab is politically the only portion of this country which is of any significance, and the others were simply tacked on out of geographical necessity and political necessity, like Gilgit and Baltistan and Baluchistan. So we're talking about West Pakistan, which is really and has always been a satrap of first the British and then an Anglo-American satrap in the Cold War. So it is very difficult to say that this particular episode of Imran Khan's ejection is regime change in a meaningful sense, because it has never been an autonomous regime. Liaquat Ali went down, 1958, Ayub Khan took over, and a succession of presidents and prime ministers have been murdered or they have died very mysterious deaths. So this regime cannot really change if it belongs to third parties who periodically alter the domestic configurations entirely for their purpose and for public relations. So Mr. Khan's ejection is really incidental to this much larger picture of Pakistan being a military cantonment which had its purposes for the West, and again, mainly the Anglo-Americans. And of course, this has now been partially seized by China for purposes which are somewhat similar, because China wishes to use West Punjab as a vehicle for harassing India, distracting India, and containing India. So regime change is meaningless in the context of Pakistan because that regime has always belonged to other people. I should only add, this is not to say Pakistan's creation was entirely due to a British conspiracy to not really leave the subcontinent, but to retreat from those areas it thought it could not control any longer, in particular because of the public upsurge and particularly Subhash Bose inciting rebellion in the British Indian armed forces. So they felt it was wise to retreat, but they didn't really retreat from the subcontinent. They conspired with Jinnah and they decided they would hang on to this portion indirectly with all the outward patronances and appearances of a state. But Pakistan has never been a state. It is a military cantonment, of which there have been many for hundreds and hundreds of years in that region. So Mr. Imran Khan's ejection is of minor significance. The only reason I think he was thrown out was because he misguidedly and because of his inexperience sought to exercise some autonomy from the military. And since the military and the state in Pakistan are synonymous, he had to go. And notice that he quickly did a U turn after the prison vans appeared outside his home in order to enforce the judgment of the Supreme Court. And he was likely to have been arrested. So he decided that it was better for him to leave quasi voluntarily than to be dragged out. So Pakistan will find another person to front the military, and its policy towards India will remain unchanged because it has always been dictated by the military. And now, of course, this military, for its survival, needs not only to ensure that there is a real or imagined conflict with India, but it also depends on its survival on Beijing. So the regime change must have had at least the consent of China for reasons which I'm sure will be eventually revealed.
It surprises me that we continue to talk of Pakistan as though it were a normal nation state. It has been, or the entire partition of India, the bloody partition was brought about in order for it to become a launch pad, that territory to become a launch pad for Mission Ghazwa Hind. They made no bones about it. So, in that sense, it is conceived as a terrorist state. You cannot accomplish Mission Ghazwa Hind unless you use terror, unless you use violence, unless you use fraud, unless you do bomb attacks, unless you do all kinds of sinister things to undermine India, both from within and without. So they use the Muslim population within for subversion and they're forever preparing terror brigades. What else is the raison d'etre or even the aspiration of Pakistan? Have they ever expressed it in any other words or any other terms, Gautam?
Well, there was support for the creation of Pakistan amongst the Indian Muslim intelligentsia, and of course, an overwhelming vote in favor of the creation of Pakistan, even in Tamil Nadu, from where very few chose to depart for the new country. So there was support. In a way, the evolution of Pakistan is a logical one. It is not something which ought to have come as a surprise, because this uh, vast number of clerics whose work and letters have been examined brilliantly by Professor Venkat Dhulipala wanted to create a religious state, and historically, such a religious state in the past has always ended up with internecine disputes which are basically about political power, but the rationale for these disputes is to define true Islam. So, where Pakistan has now ended up as a violent terrorist state is exactly where it was scheduled to end up. Now, in between came the military intervention to exercise direct control by third parties, but even they could not hold this back, and the military, particularly under General Zia, sought to harness this for their own purposes. And all the politicians have been obliged to acknowledge this reality of the religious dynamics of Pakistan society. And now what is happening, and it has been happening for a while, is that the tail of religious extremism, which they sought to control, is wagging the dog. But where it has ended up, as I keep saying, is actually where it was intended to. If you look through all the debates of the 1930s, it was a religious state that they wanted, and that's what they are getting. And
There's
only
no
the delay
religion
was
in
caused
Islam.
by
We use the word religion, Gautam Da. Where is religion in Islam? Mazhab is also very different from religion.
well,
Islam
I'm only
is
using the term.
quite unique insofar as it's though Abrahamic in origin and similar to Christianity in some ways, similar, but it's a different breed altogether. It gives you no choice to be at peace. It gives you no choice to uh, to live peacefully with others, no matter who those others are. So I don't know how we can call it based on religion. I mean, you can say many of those countries that call themselves Christian Republic, whatever, are based on such principle. But religion is has elements other than what Islam's mandate did. It's genocidal. What else is there to it?
I would beg to differ. I never describe Islam as a dharma, which some people are apt to do. And where I would disagree with you is that, if you look particularly at the fourth and fifth century of Christianity, the result is virtually 100%.
Yeah, I
They too
agree.
engaged in massive
I agree.
iconoclasm, massive.
Yeah.
And also for use of force, mass murder, and it continued. And Christianity only changed because it emerged almost totally victorious in all the areas it occupied. It basically eliminated all alternatives, which is what Islam has done in those areas which it occupied. So the similarities actually are striking. That is, hatred for the other, mass killings, and iconoclasm. I mean, the great statue of Athena was one of the things that the Christians destroyed. The great philosopher was skinned alive in North Africa and Egypt. So all of these are very similar. It's just that Islam has continued to practice all of this while the West now has sophisticated advanced weapons to bomb you from far away. They don't need to send individuals to cause acts of terror. They send airplanes and missiles. There is no fundamental difference. It is in both cases a lust for power and dominion. So it's just that Christianity has been more successful, reasons which are slightly different. For example, Christianity became institutionalized. It did not depend so much on charismatic individuals as in the case of Islam. So that was an advantage. They established themselves throughout the system as opposed to one person. Of course, there were important figures like St. Augustine, who did dominate, but he too actually was exactly like Muhammad. He said the same things. You must destroy all alternatives in order to establish the rule of Christianity. I mean, this is all in his work. So
Yeah.
I can agree that let's not use the word religion, but religion, as far as we know, are basically Islam and Christianity, and these are, as Sitaram Goel once said to me, political ideologies.
Yeah.
These are just political ideologies. And political ideologies
Yes.
need ruthless force in order to prevail. And of course, Christianity and Islam also fought with each other. And we also were the mugs. We were the victims. But one thing I will say about Pakistan to change tack a little bit, though I regard that mostly as a very large military cantonment, they have been immensely successful on two levels. On one level, they have managed to corner India, constrain India, and preoccupy India. And on the other, the ideological, intellectual influence they exercise over India is simply staggering. There are more people in India, in the political parties, and in the intellectual world who prefer Pakistan to our contemporary government. I certainly felt that in Calcutta, which I've just visited, that amongst the educated classes, there is more dislike for the central government BJP than for Pakistan. So I have to say the Pakistani project of the Anglo-Americans was immensely successful, despite being intellectually, philosophically, and morally hollow.
I think
And there is no sign that even the United States will abandon them. There is no sign the United States will abandon them completely. Though China has become dominant, the United States will not let go of Pakistan. It is far too useful. And one of the purposes of Pakistan, if you just look at the geography, is to send a message to India, you be a good boy. Otherwise, we will turn on the tap water. And an Indian diplomat once told me that the reason why they didn't engage with Taiwan in a public way is that the Chinese immediately turned on the Pakistani tap. This is about 15, 16 years ago. So Pakistan is very useful, but if you look at its usefulness, it is mainly against India. They, of course, have used Pakistani soldiers in the Arab world, during the Grand Mosque occupation. They have used it in Jordan. In fact, Brigadier Zia was the one who killed thousands of Palestinians at the behest of the United States. He commanded the Pakistani forces in Palestine, in Lebanon. And but the real use remains India. That is why it was created. And whoever controls Pakistan will use it. And the Chinese are doing so most of all. Now, the one difference I see today in the last 6, 7 years, that official India is far less willing to play the game of according them the recognition and respect. And Modi government has insisted any violence and no talk. So that is the first minimum and important step to delegitimize this monstrosity, which is simply a way of carrying on a 1,000-year-old jihad against India.
Yeah. Let me welcome Dr. Chrungoo. Welcome, Doctor. Thank you for joining. I knew you were going to come late, so we provided for that space. Dr. Chrungoo, Dr. Sen was just talking about how successful Pakistan has been in its as an enterprise. One, in cornering India globally. We are forever on the defensive, never they. And I'm putting it in my words, Gautam, correct me if I got it wrong, in intellectual colonization of India. Because, as he put it very aptly, a large section of the educated elite in India, those who consider themselves progressive, those who consider themselves secular, however idiotic those words sound in the context of India, they prefer Pakistan. They don't just dislike this present regime more than they dislike Pakistan, but I would say most of them actually prefer Pakistan to the Indian state. Every time there's a conflict, they are on the side of Pakistan, and they will, whether in the form of candle marches or peace initiatives or pressing that we better have good relations with our neighbor. ये जो बीमारी है, would you not say it's actually more successful in some ways than even intellectual colonization by the West, by our erstwhile British rulers and America?
See, there has been a very colossal failure on the part of broadly Hindus of various hues, of various intellectual lineages, and that failure has been the failure of not understanding the project of Pakistan. See, in India, we talk about that it was Pakistan was created because of the two-nation theory. But you will, if you study the entire project of Pakistan, you will not find any national, you will not find any national content in the project of Pakistan. In India, the failure has been that we could not define properly the project of Pakistan. While the Pakistani leadership from the very inception has been speaking very clearly and eloquently about the project of Pakistan. Now, the present regime, just a few days back, this government came down. Imran Khan was stressing it again and again, the concept of this new Medina, Riyasat-e-Medina, the state of Medina. And whatever little study I have, I don't claim to be a very deep historian about the developments of partition, but I have tried to study, I have tried to go into the thinking process which led to Pakistan. And you will be clearly amazed to find that almost all the top leaders of Pakistan who articulated the project of Pakistan articulated the project of Pakistani state. They did not articulate the project of Pakistani nation. The project of Pakistani nation they counterpoised because they wanted an international recognition to a project. But basically, Pakistan was from the very inception a springboard for the expansion of Islam. And that is how they defined. That is their problem also. Because their problem is that they did not invest on the national project. They invested on the project of Riyasat Medina. They invested on the project of what you call as a springboard, effective springboard against the East, the non-Muslim East, which was India. And what Mr. Sain was saying is right, that they succeeded. And we failed because we did not even try to understand what the project is. We tried to compare the nation of Pakistan with the nation of India. We tried to create a relationship with Pakistan on the basis of the national indicators. Pakistan never tried to create a relationship with India on the basis of national indicators. Pakistan had a problem. The fundamental problem was the water resources. If it was a nation, it would try to come into it would try to come to terms with India, because it would have immediately known that we have a problem. We have a very serious geographical or a problem of resources. And now, after getting Pakistan, now let us stabilize. Let us relate to India in that term. So Pakistan is a project, it's an Islamic project, it's a springboard of the expansion of Islam. And then Pakistan is a genocidal state. It has come out of the womb of a genocide. An unfortunate part has been the very foundations of the state of India have been the denial of Hindu genocide. And it started, the very character, the mind process of the state of India started with denying what was happening to the Hindus, what happened to the Hindus around partition, not to speak before that, 1,000-year-old genocidal war against Hindus and subsequently. So I think the problem of Indian side is a colossal intellectual failure. We have not recognized the Pakistan project in its true spirits. We have not called it by a proper name, and then we have not evolved a policy. We are still treating Pakistan as a normal nation. Until the time we try to have a relationship with Pakistan, hoping that it will become a normal nation, we will be chasing a mirage, and we will fail, invariably fail.
Okay, if I were to ask both of you, we know what the problem with Pakistan is. At least now, a good section of Hindus, thanks to these conversations on social media and availability of literature on these subjects, availability of literature on Islam, availability on the ideology of Pakistan. We have access to it for the first time in the last 10, 12 years. And therefore, there is a mindset change among large sections of the population. However, our power wielders refuse to change the course. If you were in power, Gautam Da, and if you were in power, Dr. Chrungoo, if you had it in you to define a policy towards Pakistan, what would that look like? How do we handle them?
This is a long-term project, and I look at it in geopolitical and historical terms. And though Islam as an ideology is very important because it is inherently expansionist, this does not concern me. What concerns me is that we are engaged in an existential struggle as a nation and a state, and it is imperative for us to remove this challenge eventually. I'm not suggesting that it can be done easily or now, that this entity called Pakistan should be reduced to what in fact is the political fulcrum of the entity, which is West Punjab. And there should only be a state called West Punjab, and the other state should be dependents aligned to India. Now, this is not something which is a sentimental aspiration for me. This is geographical, geopolitical, and historical necessity. And what third parties have to say about this really is only relevant if we are so weak that we are worried about them. India must be powerful enough to remove this challenge to our existence, which in various guises has caused us immense suffering. And our local problems, religious problems, will also therefore be very substantially mitigated. A great deal of the militancy we see within India is connected to the existence of this external agent and threat. And we have to be very cold hearted, very hard hearted, and plan for the long run. For example, Nehru allowed Gilgit and Baltistan to be seized by the British, no doubt under the influence of his British patrons and his girlfriend Edwina. And we therefore lost land connectivity with Afghanistan and Central Asia. Now, no serious state can allow this to persist. And one of the dangers I see is our intelligentsia and some officials of the highest rank keep talking about turning the line of control into the international border. This would be a way of tying the hands of future generations forever. We should do no such thing. The line of control is a temporary concession we were obligated to make, and this border will be changed as and when it is possible, and we should be in a position to do it without being in the least bit concerned about what is said by these juvenile Georgetown PhDs who become senior officials, or Beijing, simply because we will have the political and military power to assert this, because it is not a luxury for us, it is a necessity for us that this state of Pakistan be West Punjab and nothing more, and all the other states should be our dependents. And it will happen. The initial steps have been taken. In 25 years' time, India will need to pay no attention to those countries which have used Pakistan against us and who constantly threaten us, who are telling us how to behave. We have to break out of this. And all I'm saying, it is not going to be easy and it's not going to be quick. But that should be the long-term aim. And all this business about Jammu and Kashmir is really a sideshow, because there is no question of Jammu and Kashmir in its entirety ever being anything but part of India, and the rights of its truly indigenous people shall be restored, and those who have been converted by force will also be offered the opportunity to return to the fold. These are things which take generations, but we have to make a start. And all this contingent contemporary politics and discourse is basically irrelevant.
Dr. Chrungoo, how would you be handling it? Dr. Sen talks about long term. In the short run and then in the long run, what would you do if you had the power?
See, I think after the takeover of Afghanistan by Taliban, India should have immediately gone ahead with declaring Pakistan as a terrorist state. And they should
Okay.
have taken it up. They should have very clearly taken it up with the international system that Pakistan is not only a danger to India, it's a danger to the international order. That should have been their declared, very clear-cut policy. And there is enough evidence that they could have really substantiated it, number one. Number two, it's very, very important that government of India should delineate the basic expression of the state of Pakistan. That is a genocide. Indian state should declare that it is interested in a plural, secular Pakistan, and any genocidal process on the territory of India, on the territory of Pakistan or elsewhere, unleashed by the state of Pakistan, Indian state has stakes in that. Indian state will take care of that. Indian nation should no longer be diffident in identifying with the freedom movements in Balochistan, even the simmering freedom movements in various other parts of Pakistan. Very clear about it. And we are still ambivalent about it. We are still ambiguous about it. We do not try to delineate our foreign policy approach towards the Pakistan. The third thing, which is very important, which in Indian state, even if it takes them time to take the first two steps, it's a springboard of jihad, global jihad. Indian state should delineate it clearly. And it should say that its relationship with Pakistan will depend on this. Indian state should not give recognition to Pakistan as a normal nation. Pakistan is an anti-nation. And if this fundamental change takes place, you see, just removal of neutralization of Article 370 and reorganization of Jammu and Kashmir state into two union territories, it knocked off the basic subversive pedestal of Pakistan. And immediately after it was the entire state of Pakistan, the government of Pakistan, we said that restoration of Article 370 is their immediate objective. In one go, entire foreign policy objectives of Pakistan were dismantled and brought to a different level. Unless and until India tells the world that Pakistan is not a nation, it's not a normal nation, it's a springboard, it's an anti-nation. It is basically upturning the international order, existing international order. Takeover of Taliban by Pakistan. They should not have concentrated much on Taliban, but they should have concentrated that Pakistan ultimately became an instrumentality of the terrorist takeover of Afghanistan. And it will not do it only there. It will associate with every moment in the world which will upturn the international order. Pakistan was at the forefront of really in the Azerbaijan-Armenian war, forefront of the Islamic expression, global Islamic expression. It took a lead in that. Government of India did not try to say that how is it interested in that. When Israel entered into the Gaza because of the bomb blast, it again took a frontal role. So unless and until the nature of the relationship of Pakistan with the international system and with India is exposed properly and is exposed relentlessly, we are not going to, will not be able to create the type of opinion which we would like the world to have with regard to Pakistan.
Okay, so here I sum up. One, you say declare Pakistan as a terrorist state, as a genocidal state, springboard of jihad. This should be declared. That should be our official policy. Encourage freedom movements in Pakistan with a view to dismantling it or breakaway factions so that it doesn't stay as a multi-ethnic this thing. All that will be left of it is the Punjabi military elite. And then de-recognize Pakistan. That's what you said. Now, these are things that you do in defining Pakistan and therefore our relationship, which means you break off all diplomatic ties. You can't have diplomatic relations, am I right? With
after takeover of Taliban in Afghanistan, we could have invested more on the Afghan relationships, and but certainly
No, but
declared Pakistan
that's
a terrorist
for a
state.
minute. Let's not bring in
Mm,
Afghanistan, because if we can't fix our relations with
mm,
Pakistan, then we can't fix it with Pakistan or elsewhere. The point that I'm trying to make is, then the minimum logical step that we need to take from this is break off all diplomatic ties. No travel to and from Pakistan. No intermarriages, which the Indian state has been encouraging. People bringing in brides and grooms from Pakistan, which to my mind is such a huge security risk, because no real check is done as to the intent of the person who's been brought in from Pakistan as a spouse. And no trade ties, no visiting, no cultural exchanges, nothing. Total breakup, a break off, right? Now that's one part, vis-a-vis how we define our relations towards Pakistan. But to my mind, a bigger failure is failure to define ourselves. Who are we? There was at one time a notion of an Akhanda Bharat. At least some sections of uh, Indians believed in it, and they thought they were going to uh, make it happen at some point in history. Is that something to be completely now abandoned because nobody talks of it? No political party will dare articulate those sentiments? Or do we, as Dr. Sen, I really like the point you made, Dr. Sen, that we should never accept line of control as the actual border, because then that will tie up future generations. Are you then saying that the vision of Akhanda Bharat should be kept alive, because only that will motivate the people and the Indian state to reclaim what was taken away through a very bloody process?
Well, I do agree that ties with Pakistan should be absolute minimal. And that is already happening, in fact. It's relatively minor. In fact, partly because Pakistan does not wish to engage in commercial relations with India. But I think, in the uh, situation we are in of rival nuclear powers, breaking off all diplomatic ties is not feasible. So that part will continue. Even the Nazis and the Russians retained diplomatic ties as the Germans were trying to destroy Russia completely. So apart from diplomatic ties, we should sever virtually everything. And I think that's pretty much happening already. Now, the problem for India is that, as far as I can tell, one vote bank in West Bengal can contemplate on turning their chosen leader into the Prime Minister of India. These vote banks across India are basically from political parties which are all mini Muslim leagues. They are able, with 18 to 20% of the vote, able to dictate the behavior of virtually all opposition parties and make the ruling party, which is supposedly unconcerned about this, highly sensitive to their opinions. Now, this 18 to 20%, when it reaches 25%, which is going to happen, is merely a question of time, will be impossible to overcome. What we are seeing today is merely an image of something much worse to come. And West Bengal, Kerala, increasingly Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, and now, of course, Maharashtra are all indicators of how this minority vote bank is able to define who we are.
So, are you saying that unless we abandon these democratic
And I'm
pretensions?
also not sure that telling the world Pakistan is a terrorist state will make any difference at all. The reason being, the only two countries who matter in this situation as the so called outside world are China and the United States. China is not going to agree that Pakistan is a terrorist state, and the United States has never done so. The United States supported genocide in East Pakistan. As we know, they were strong supporters of Ayah Khan. The United States has suffered enough terrorist attacks from Pakistanis in the United States, but they have their own reasons. So the two countries which matter most of all know perfectly well what Pakistan is all about, and that is not going to change. Of course, we are culpable because we have been very hesitant, very reserved in expressing ourselves and telling the truth, though we have gotten better at it of late. So the only solution is the long term one of India becoming strong enough to do what it needs to do. Hoping others will support us is actually not very helpful.
No, I agree with you. If Russia can follow its own geopolitical interests without caring two hoots about what America or China think about it, I see no reason why India shouldn't do the same. We don't owe much to the rest of the world. They've never stood by us. So I don't understand why we should even bother. And the less you bother about them, the more likely they are to accept you on your own terms. Dr. Chrungoo, tell me, uh, can this be done? ये जो वोट बैंक पॉलिटिक्स का सारा खेल है कि आपके अंदर जो पाकिस्तान बैठे हैं वो डिटरमिन कर रहे हैं आपके देश की पॉलिटिक्स क्या होगी. ये तो दिख गया बंगाल में भी, ये तो दिख रहा है हर जगह जहां जहां बीजेपी परास्त हो रही है, या यूपी में भी where Yogi ji won with a very narrow margin in many seats. He should have had a landslide victory given his performance, but he didn't. Now the point I'm trying to get at is, क्या ये डेमोक्रेटिक फसाड के अंदर जो डेमोक्रेसी हमारी हॉस्टेज है आज जिहादियों के हाथ और ब्रेकअप इंडिया फोर्सेस के हाथ, इसके माध्यम से हम कभी सुधार कर भी सकते हैं कि इस डेमोक्रेसी का मोह भंग करना पड़ेगा.
You see, if what is the gravity of the situation is that our Home Minister goes to Kashmir and he does not find any rationale and he does not find any reason to muster the courage to meet a Hindu victim who was killed there recently. If the level of our understanding of handling the internal issues is this type, then thinking of a bigger, say, reconstruction of the polity along different principles, that thing, it's a tall order. What good has happened is that despite the constraints which were created right at the inception when India, after the partition, started emerging as now a separate nation, despite the constraints based on ultimately divide and undermine the Hindus at all levels, a consistent, relentless approach has ultimately reached a point where all those political parties are also disintegrating. And broadly, a mandate which is a Hindu mandate is emerging. I'm not talking about just a fluke one election. I'm talking now about almost last 2.5 decades. This trend has been stabilized. So this trend has to be further intensified for some time. I don't think we will be exposing ourselves to internal fracture and internal destabilization to a bigger extent if we think of recasting or reconstructing the polity of India. But I want to tell you one thing. Not that I disagree with Mr. Sain on the basic premises. I think I agree with him. But I never said, when I made my proposition, I never said that we should, I did not make a comment about what type of diplomatic relationship we should have with Pakistan, to what extent. But I said that India should start speaking about Pakistan as India sees it. Say, for example,
What happened? हैंग हो गया? आपका वाईफाई हैंग हो गया क्या? Dr. Chrungoo, are you there? Hello. Um, Gautam da, would you like to take over for a while we check out what's happened with Ashish? Will you please call Dr. Chrungoo and find out what went wrong with this connection? And in the meantime, Gautam da, could you?
I sympathize with what Dr. Chandru is saying and his uh, wishes for what the future might look
A
like.
bit
But
louder, please.
we need to be realistic about the challenges we face. These are very severe challenges. I recall in March, April last year that I tried to tell my friends the BJP that Mamata Banerjee is going to win. Nobody would listen. Everybody said there is an absolute wave. And my argument was very simple. Arithmetic is against somebody else winning. They had 31% of the vote, and it's very easy to organize the remaining 8-9% through bribery and intimidation. And the minority vote bank has always remained intact. I would like to see some figures in UP which suggest otherwise. And we are unduly complacent. The UP election with the majority was won by 3.98 lakh votes. 3.98 lakh votes determined the fate of 70 assembly seats. That is 3.98. So we should not get unduly optimistic. Nor do I
Yeah.
believe there is a great upsurge in national sentiment, cultural sentiment, call it Hindu what you like. A great many people in UP voted for superior governance and what they have experienced in terms of bad governance before. For example, security of women. And people did not say they voted for Ayodhya. They did not say we are voting for what is going to happen in Mathura or elsewhere. So we should not be we are facing a very severe challenge. And West Bengal is an indication of where we are headed. For example, if you look at the numbers of people in the two communities of childbearing age in West Bengal, the writing is on the wall. So we have to be extremely conscious. We have made a start, but not a huge start in consolidating a national consciousness based partly on good governance, but it must also be a cultural consciousness. Without a cultural consciousness, sense of identity, this will go nowhere. And I'm afraid I see no signs of an orchestrated, organized attempt to change the narrative about who we are. None whatsoever. On the contrary, I constantly hear people saying, be careful not to cause offense. Be careful not to upset people in Washington. Be careful about the Washington Post. This is how we look at ourselves. And until we overcome this and we aggressively promote our sense of selfhood, there is no hope.
Yeah, Ajay ji, आप कुछ कह रहे थे, and then you.
I was just trying to say that I was not, I was only trying to say that we have to, with regard to Pakistan, we have to define it very clearly. And the biggest mistake is that if we try to give Pakistan the recognition of a normal nation, that has been the biggest flaw. We should define it very clearly. And it should, say, for example, in all our dealings with Americans, now Americans take care about our sensitivities with regard to Pakistan's role in fomenting terrorism in India. And they would accept statements here and there which would refer to that. But taking this to a different level, that what is recognized as an international terrorism, its epicenter is Pakistan. Saying it regularly, saying it not as a national sensitivity, reflecting it as a national sensitivity, and telling the world that you are also taking a risk if you are not accepting it. It's very, very important. The second thing which I do agree that with Mr. Sain, that unless we define, we are very confident and we are very forthright in defining what we are, then what for is after the partition of India, I don't think Hindu historical and civilizational continuity should have been at all disowned. How Hindu historical and civilizational continuity is owned, that process we have to think of. because Indian state cannot be bereft of any sensitivity and any commitment to preserve the historical and civilizational continuity of the Hindus. That's why I said that since Indian state started ab initio in 47 as a state, which started defining itself in denying the atrocities or denying the genocides inflicted on Hindus, it ultimately became an alienated state. We have an Indian state which is alienated from the nation or alienated from the civilization of the nation. So when Mr. Sain says that yes, we have to define ourselves, I fully agree with him. But with regard to Pakistan, we cannot commit because we are at that point of history when Pakistan, the relevance of Pakistan as existed in 47 has broadly changed. And unless we state our position, we will be committing, and we will not be exerting enough pressures on the international system to let them know that these are our problems. And so far as Pakistan, you see, supporting the historical identities within Pakistan, say Balochi identity, Sindhi identity, ultimately is a way of ultimately making them link up with the civilization identity of India, because they're broadly the part of the civilizational identity of India. We should not be apologetic about that. So there has to be a change. I agree that these changes take place over a period of time. Attitudes change, attitudes of the state and the government, particularly in the foreign policy affairs, it takes them some time to change. But you see, imagine a situation in West Bengal. I personally feel if the West Bengal elections would have been held in a governor's rule, situation would have been far better than what it is now. Who made the present government to commit this mistake? Which quarter the present government in Delhi was trying to please? See, what the violence which we have seen in West Bengal is genocidal violence. And we have done nothing to show the pattern of violence against the Hindus. Bangladesh, the Hindus are already suffering a genocide. They have suffered a continuous genocide. And that genocide has now spilled over into the West Bengal. And it was a huge disappointment. You see, Madhu, what happens, I have known it in Kashmir, in attrition zones where Hindus are in significant numbers, they still choose candidates whom they think are politically empowered, they are politically important. They don't choose candidates who are best candidates for them. So we have in Srinagar, Habakal constituency, the Hindus will not choose a BJP candidate or a Congress candidate. They would choose a National Conference candidate, because they were sure that ultimately the National Conference will be in power and we will be unnecessarily on the receiving end. In the areas where there is persecution and attrition, when the local vote banks or the local vote formations, they think about these things. And in Bengal is far more intense, because people know that if they are seen voting for the other side, which is not, the violence will be unleashed against them. So unless and until we give them that confidence that okay, a change is going to happen and the state is there to protect you, things do not shift to this side. So this whole thing has to be done at multiple levels. Existing political structures which are in India, more or less Hindus have done wisely for last 2.5 decades. They have shifted the power from Congress establishment, which was ruling India the way in the same way the British wanted to divide India. They worked like that. Communists were from the very beginning in cohorts with the Islamists in the international arena also, and in the Indian context also, in disintegrating the national identity of India. So despite all these difficulties, some changes have been made and some political gains have been made. Consolidating on that, there is nothing wrong of thinking of recasting the polity along different principles, but then that will take some time. I think the bigger issue, prime issue, should be the ideological war which we have with Pakistan.
See, one is ideological war with Pakistan. The other is a clearer definition of self. Who are we? Are we, this very bastardized version of secularism that is completely emasculated our society. But coming back to another theme, I'm sure you all saw on television channels how in his last days, Imran Khan kept ranting about how strong India is, what a spine it has, nobody dares effect regime change, how India hold on to its own principles, to its own goals, whereas Pakistan is always being dictated terms too. What do you make of that rant? And how is it going to be different with now the new prime minister?
Well, this is a very silly attempt by Imran Khan to appeal to the people of Pakistan and perhaps even to some of his opponents by saying, look, even our enemy, our principal enemy, is able to orchestrate and organize better than us. I don't think anybody in Pakistan was impressed by that because people on the whole know this to be true. He was simply a very mediocre leader who took to radical rhetoric to legitimize himself, particularly on J&K, and threatened nuclear war, standing on the General Assembly podium. So this is not a man to be taken seriously. He was accorded a role to perform by the army. He performed the role, and then he was no longer useful. So he went. So I don't think we should spend much time worrying about what this particular change represents, because in the end, Pakistan remains relatively unchanged. With the military at the helm, and the military has a clear policy, A, dictated by hostility to India, which is its sole justification for dominating Pakistan society, and secondly, it takes its orders from Beijing, without which it would have no weapons, it would have no fighter aircraft, no tanks. So this is not a state. This is simply um, a thorn on the flesh of India, and we should simply prepare to deal with this. And I'm not suggesting that this is the time, as now, to do that. We are not yet ready. We are a relatively small economy, only under 3 trillion, or just above. We have to wait and be patient. But we must prepare. And the most important preparation is to make India economically and militarily powerful. I keep saying that is the only solution to the belligerence of our neighbors, and the only solution to the blackmail of our so-called friends. Now, just as an aside, people now in India and some of the news channels have been ranting and raving about Russia's human rights violations and war crimes in the Ukraine. The first thing is 95% of this is fabrication and propaganda, as we will discover eventually. But what I would like to say to Indians is to think what India would do if the Chinese entered into a military alliance with Nepal and parked nuclear missiles in the Terai region. What do you think India would do? Would India just sit quietly and allow this to happen? No, India would not.
Yes,
This is exactly the
India
same
will
situation
allow.
for Russia and the Ukraine. So our issues are very, very simple, and I think the government understands that, and much of its behavior reaffirms this, that we have to hold our own as best we can, given our weaknesses, given the fact that we have challenges in two frontiers, but we must strive as rapidly as possible to become economically and militarily powerful. My only criticism is that economic and military power will not suffice. You need a united people, a people united as a nation. And for that, you need to change the narrative. And on this front, I'm sorry, I see no action at all. It is important that we address the absolutely ridiculous school curriculum, particularly in the human sciences and social sciences, history, etc. And we also do the same for our universities. People are coming out of this turned
नीचे से
into
जा
anti-Indian, pro-Pakistani individuals. And this can be stopped, but I'm afraid nothing, as I say again and again, has happened on this front. This is the first and most important thing outstanding.
Okay, Dr. Chrungoo, this is going to be my last bit of questions and comments. One, I somehow don't think it was just Imran Khan indulging in histrionics when he kept saying, India ki taraf dekho, see how well they manage and how badly we manage ourselves. because a good section of the Pakistani intelligentsia elite think like that. I've heard it, not once, not twice, but across the board. A lot of them do look upon India with a certain measure of envy, of certain measure of, they've done it so much better. Look at how independent minded they are. It's not just Imran doing theatrics. That's my gut feeling. Though that will not stop any Pakistani from launching terror attacks. So Imran may do all that drama, but he is ready with his terror attacks against India, preparing it all the time. But more importantly, the other part that Dr. Sen was talking about, uh, change of narrative. Of course, that's necessary. But what about demographic change? That's really weighed against us in a very serious manner. And changing, it's a time bomb ticking. Here, there were comments about that many crore uh, Muslims within India who don't feel a sense of belonging, or no belonging they do in the sense this is their बाप दादा की जमीन. अब तो वो नैरेटिव बन गया है, ये नहीं कि हम भी हिंदुस्तान को प्यार करते हैं, पर हमारे बाप दादा का है, आप कौन होते हो, ये जो अग्रेशन आया है. और वो उसका बड़ा कारण है जो डेमोग्राफिक चेंज उनके फेवर में हुआ है. वंस दे रीच 20% देन इट्स इरिवर्सिबल. अब डेमोग्राफी को चेंज अगर कभी करना है तो उन्हीं ढंग से करना पड़ेगा ना जिस ढंग से उन्होंने बदली थी. अभी डॉक्टर सेन कह रहे थे कि अगर नेपाल में मान लो चाइना वो करने आ जाए, वो न्यूक्लियर प्लांट करने आ जाए जैसे रशिया ने नेटो में किया, वहां यूक्रेन में किया, तो क्या इंडिया चुपचाप बैठा रहेगा? मेरा मत है कि इंडिया चुपचाप बैठा ही नहीं रहेगा, 100 जस्टिफिकेशन ढूंढ लेगा for not acting, against Nepal. I don't think India would ever dare what Russia has done in Ukraine, even a mild version of it. So, तीन चार ये सवाल and then we'll wind up.
See, so far as Ukraine war is concerned, I fully agree with Mr. Sen, and I think that this is my view. He has been an upstart, the president of Ukraine. He was not understanding what nuclear balance of power means and what is the implication of transgressing the boundaries of this nuclear balance of power. Because the moment you do it, somebody does it in the real sense, then the entire approach of international relationships changed. So Russians waited too long. They repeatedly told Americans that there was, after the end of Soviet Union, they tried to establish relationship with America and tell them that now even NATO is not required because now there is no Soviet Union. And then after the dismantling of the Warsaw Pact, they had a justification in saying that let's not now have military blocs. Then when Americans did not agree, they told them that you make us part of the NATO also. The point is, it didn't happen. They saw with each cycle, Americans were extending and they were moving closer and closer to the red line. And the mistake which was done, that was not a mistake. I think the history will tell him that if your country is not powerful enough to deter Russians militarily from expanding or exercising their power, since it's a nuclear power, you should not have gone to the extent where you will openly create a justification for their intervention. I think Zelensky brought destruction. Maybe he was being egged upon by that, and he was feeling his ego was being bloated because every now and then one head of the state from Europe or America would have been calling him, and he must have been feeling at the top of the world. And this is a tragedy which happened. But so far as the justification of entering into in the existing balance of power in the world, I don't think Americans have that much stronger case. We can only tell Russians to be more humane. That is a different thing. But it's absolutely right that there was a perfect justification for the type of confrontation, because this is how the world order is. Now the second thing is what you said,
Would India
that would
ever
India do with India? So that is to be tested, because we don't know whether Indian leadership, military as well as the political leadership, has evolved to the extent where they can enforce deterrence. Whatever is the structure of our deterrence, whatever are the boundaries of our deterrence, if those boundaries are transgressed, would we enforce? Are we ready to enforce? That is to be seen. I do not know. Normally, with normal logic, as Sain said, India has no other choice but to enter into Nepal if nukes are put by, say, Chinese into China. That is a normal logic. But if India does not do that, then India's having nuclear weapons and India's being a nuclear power, it has no meaning. The same thing is in the reverse way true with regard to our enforcing the deterrence with regard to, say, Pakistan. The argument which has been given for a long period of time that it's a nuclear flashpoint, Jammu and Kashmir. So we have to run the governments on the principle of compromise. That was basically submitting to the nuclear blackmail. That was basically allowing the nuclear umbrella of Pakistan to have a deterrence impact so that they can continue with their policy of bleeding India. So that thing, fortunately, a few times during Modi's regime, that whole process has been punctured. There have been some good things which Modi did. That was one of the things which he did. He tried to give an impression to Pakistan that they will have to go back to their drawing board and redraw the strategic map, redraw their strategic orientations. Balakot, in fact, did it. But you're right when you are saying that would we do it? The political behavior of this of the leadership across the political parties, it many times gives you doubts that they are not capable enough to understand the power of deterrence and the actual, what you call as the importance of enforcing the deterrence. So perhaps the history will tell us whether they will rise to that level. Fortunately, during this period of time, after so many weak responses to Pakistani terrorism, a few times Modi government has gone a step ahead and given that impression. And to that extent, we can say, okay, there is a segment of leadership within the political system and the military leadership who understand that yes, there is the importance of deterrence, and we cannot afford to succumb to the nuclear blackmail argument. That is the second thing. Third thing is with regard to the third question, which we are talking about, that you were talking about the demographic component. To the demographic component, the most important part is for the Hindus first. I am telling you with regard to Kashmiri Hindus. You see, after the displacement in 90 and the extreme insecurity, suddenly the entire community shifted from a 3-child norm to 1-child norm. And then marriages got delayed, and the males would marry around an age group of say 33 to 35, and the females will marry in the age group of say around 30. That played havoc. Then gradually we had to shift to the 2-child norm and try to plead with our people that they should marry early. The male should marry just before 30, and the female should marry around 25. And we started telling our people that their first child should be in the first year. They should shift from the 1-child norm to at least 2-child norm. We have not fully succeeded in that. But the approach of Hindus overall, the middle class, educated Hindus, to ultimately the family, it has to change. And it has to change because everywhere we think the same thing is happening. Delayed marriages, delayed first child, micro families, this has to be abandoned. So if we have to fight the demographic war, then the educated Hindu has to understand that it has to create a very clear-cut consciousness.
Hindu wants 2-child law. पागल हैं हमारे हिंदू लीडर कह रही है
तो demographic. दूसरी बात, then legal measures and other things, family planning, whatever is being advocated, I don't say they are not important, but at least this is something about which we should be talking very, very intensely, very, very this regularly about this thing, this demographic thing. I think there is a problem within our outlook, particularly the educated Hindus, with regard to what type of families we have. And it has to be explained to the children that the well-being of the family, the happiness of the family is when the family is full. When you have cousins, you can enjoy. When you have friend circle, you can then celebrate. And then even if you have some problem, there is somebody to share. This concept has to go very scientifically, very logically to the minds of the family. We discuss everything in the family. We discuss the education, we discuss the business, we discuss the perks in the pay, but we never discuss when we have to marry. It is being, we laugh at it. And if you tell your cousin, why is it you are married for 4 years, why don't you have a child? He laughs at it. It is not a serious issue. Everything else is a serious issue. I think, having due respect to both of you, that yes, there are so many other ways of creating that demographic, ultimately that situation which is favorable, but the first thing has to start from us. And I am telling you as a victim, we have seen it, and I tell you, it is so important. Wherever the families have listened to us, and they have started having good, reasonably good families, they are happy families, they have prospered, and they have been able to help their own family, kith and kin, and the nation also.
I think that's the most important message. I have been hammering on this from this platform and any other platform I get consistently, for the simple reason, a single child family or a two child family means there is no chacha, no chachi, there's no bua, no masi, no relatives. So मैं और हमारे दो बस, या हमारा एक, हम दो हमारा एक, ये तो इसका मतलब हमारे बच्चों के पास ना, कजन्स की बात तो छोड़िए, जो इमीडिएट सबसे इंटीमेट रिश्ते होते थे, चाचा चाची, ताऊ ताई, बुआ फूफा, और कितने सारे मामा मामी, सब खत्म हो जाएंगे ना, बच्चों को पता ही नहीं। और अगर फैमिली टूटी और फिर डिस्पर्स हो रहे हैं, दो बच्चे हैं, एक बैठा है बैंगलोर में, दूसरा बैठा है कैलिफोर्निया में, तो कोई फैमिली भी नहीं रहती है, और फैमिली रहेगा।
A fulfilled family has the cultural anchors and the psychological anchors. We need both. A good family, reasonable. We don't mean to say families like Muslims marrying 4 times or 5 times. I don't mean to say that, but having a reasonably decent family, a good full family, that's very important.
No, I think it's really important. I, for example, had no sister. I had only 2 brothers. All my life, that was a pain that I lived with. I yearned for a sister. I yearned for 6 sisters. I would have liked 4-5 behne. I would have liked at least 3-4 bhai. Honestly, I wish my mother's family, there were 8 of them. From 8 to in no time 2, फिर 1, कोई टाइम ही नहीं लगा। तो अभी मुझे लग रहा है कि ये बहुत जरूरी है सोचना, हम
most important.
हाँ, और वो
we can fight the war, we can fight the civilizational cultural war also if we have the demographic critical mass. If we lose that, we lose.
Dr. Chrungoo, there's another thing I'd like to add and then end this today. The other thing is rebond with our neighborhood and community. This breakaway from the community movement, me and mine, जो आई है मैकॉले एजुकेशन के साथ, इससे हुआ ये है कि we have become total slaves of the सरकारी mandate. मुस्लिम्स इसलिए मजबूत हैं, इसलिए नहीं सिर्फ कि उनके 6 बच्चे हैं या 8 बच्चे हैं, वो एक बात है, पर कम्युनिटी सॉलिडारिटी, नेबरहुड सॉलिडारिटी,
community life, you have to have a very healthy community life. That is very critical.
Healthy neighborhood life. एक तो है आपके रिश्तेदारों के साथ बहुत इंटीमेट, नेबरहुड में बहुत स्ट्रॉन्ग टाइज, और इसीलिए पुलिस की भी हिम्मत नहीं होती कि किसी को पकड़ने चले जाएं मुस्लिम नेबरहुड में. दे डू नॉट अलाउ द स्टेट टू डोमिनेट देयर लाइफ, whereas Hindus have become slaves of the state, even though the state is hostile to Hindu interests and hostile to Hindu survival. Even when we are living in those states of India, जहां सरकार बिल्कुल औरंगजेब फरमान जैसे करते हैं, ऐसे हो रहा है. ऐसे हो रहा है जैसे कि आप सेकंड क्लास थर्ड क्लास सिटीजन बन के जी रहे हैं. वहां भी इतने सर्वाइव हो जाते हैं कहीं भी. अच्छा, दूसरा जो एक लास्ट पॉइंट, इतने 1000 साल तक हमारे मंदिर टूटे, आज तक हमें नहीं सूझा एक मंदिर प्रोटेक्शन फोर्स होना चाहिए. ये तो करो. अच्छे से अच्छे मोहल्ले के मंदिर हैं, चाहे आपके नेबरहुड के हैं. अभी आए दिन आप यहाँ मंदिरों पे आज भी अटैक हो रहे हैं. कोई हमारे पास मंदिर प्रोटेक्शन फोर्स नाम की भी चीज नहीं, सोचा भी नहीं किसी ने. और मालूम है पुलिस नहीं सपोर्ट करती, मालूम है पुलिस नहीं आएगी आपको बचाने, मालूम है कि दूसरी तरफ से उनका कमिटमेंट आज भी हमारे मंदिर तोड़ने का, आज भी हमें डरा के भगाने का है हमारे नेबरहुड से. अपनी सेल्फ प्रोटेक्शन के लिए भी कुछ नहीं, मंदिरों की रक्षा के लिए कुछ नहीं. तो जब इतनी नालायक हो जाते हैं, आपका पुरुषार्थ ही नहीं है. आई थिंक कम्युनिटी सर्वाइव ओनली थ्रू पुरुषार्थ, और वो जब खत्म हो जाता है समाज में, और मैं करते करते वो इतना सा दायरा बन गया है. Nobody for you. If I know that in this neighborhood, if one family were to be attacked, I don't think people will come out of their house even to ask हुआ क्या. हादसे के बाद 2 दिन बाद हाय हाय करने आ जाएंगे, ये तो बहुत बुरा हुआ, but not at that time. Nobody's going to. And I really miss now the kind of stable neighborhoods people used to live in, where people lived within their own community. जैसे कश्मीर में पंडित भी किसी जमाने में जहाँ रहते थे, तो वो पंडितों का ही होता था. अब उसको आज आप ghettoization, ये उल्टे सीधे नाम दे रहे हैं. So I think this message really is important. And so the conclusion clearly is your concluding comments on regime change in Pakistan, more of the same or back to worse.
I just wanted to say on that, I personally feel that it needs a separate session also, if you feel in the coming days. I think Pakistan and the entire polity of Pakistan, even and the political establishment of Pakistan and the state of Pakistan, they are for the first time encountering a situation where they know that they are not as important as they used to think many times in the history of their existence. There is no definite power block with which to identify. They are not sure, and then they know it very well that from the Muslim world to the Western world, the Pakistanis are not being respected because of the type of political culture and the social culture which they have created. So there is a situation where, and the leadership of Pakistan, military as well as political, they are trying to find an anchor, and they are not this time sure about any anchor. Whatever has been the power differences, whatever have been, because people, his government was also a hybrid government. It was created by the army, but this is a problem with the army, and this is the problem with the political parties. I think this uncertainty within the Pakistan about to which bloc they represent, or what type of strategic relationship they have to build. The confusion about that is also creating the type of things which are happening this time in Pakistan, and that has to be kept in mind, because many things which Imran is articulating, that is reflecting on the ground. And we have to understand that Pakistan has a 60% of the youth bulge, and the people who are flocking to Imran even now, they are youth. We cannot ignore the importance of Imran Khan in the political system of Pakistan. So Pakistan is that is why I am again saying that this was the time for India to put the pressures and tell the world to that unless the nature of Pakistan changes, Pakistan will be at war with itself. It will be at war with the world.
Pakistan cannot change its nature. I mean, unless की बात छोड़ो. I don't think
So,
that we need to,
so
it's like to reform Muslim personal law.
no.
जहाँ हुआ है वो डंडे के जोर पे उनको ऑप्ट आउट करना पड़ा है. कभी कहीं भी ऐसा चांस मुझे तो नहीं. खैर,
This is the time to exert pressures, maximum pressures.
जी. Gautam da, are you there? You want to conclude? Last words, Gautam da, or you've lost the connection? Looks
He has
like
probably lost
Wi-Fi.
it. Yes. There's some
Okay.
problem today. We had some problem.
Gautam
Gautam
da,
bhai.
you've come. Your last words and we
I
wind
have
up.
briefly lost the connection. Well,
Yeah.
I think,
Last
to
words.
go back to the original issue, I think Imran Khan's departure is of very minor significance to the future of Pakistan and to Pakistan's relations with India and the wider world. The military will remain dominant as it has always been, at least since 1958, when Ayub Khan seized the leadership. And what India is doing is correct, which is to build up its strength, to ensure that there is no dialogue while terrorist violence continues. And we await what happens beyond that. And our own problems, we have to continue dealing with them patiently and with great purpose.
Okay.
And these problems are well
Thank you.
understood by.
Okay. Your connection is going again and again.
Okay.
Many of us.
So let's. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So thank you both of you. Okay,
Thank you.
viewers. A few important points have emerged as to what we can do, each one of us, especially with regard to our family, our community, rebonding with our neighborhood, rebonding with our own samaj, instead of trying to live as atomized individuals or families that are a microcosm in their own self. और दुनिया जाए भाड़ में, मी एंड माइन, ये वाली दुनिया से तो आप सरवाइव नहीं कर पाएंगे. कितने जो भी चैलेंजेस आज हमारे देश के सामने मुंह बाए खड़े हैं. इन्हीं शब्दों के साथ आपकी आज्ञा लेते हैं. शुभ रात्रि. वंदे मातरम.